Failure starts in your mind. Prologue. Your greatest triumphs and darkest defeats are sealed long before the world even stirs. Napoleon Hill named it the workshop of the mind, a hidden forge where thought collides with thought, flinging sparks that harden into lived reality. Most people wander through this interior terrain as tourists. They marvel at an occasional sunrise of inspiration, then retreat when storm clouds of doubt roll in. You, however, have come as a cartographer. You are here to map the unseen trenches where failure seeds itself, to expose the hidden valleys where defeat first whispers its lies, and to seize the high ground from which success can survey the whole estate. Hill insisted that every outcome begins as a mental posture we adopt, often unconsciously. Before a bankruptcy is filed, before a relationship dissolves, before a dream derails, there is invariably a quiet moment when we concede in thought, surrendering sovereignty to fear, doubt, or habit. In that instant, the subconscious inks a contract that the outer world will dutifully honor. Yet the opposite is also true. When a person flames into greatness, so abrupt and electric that onlookers call it luck, the fuse was actually lit deep within, by a definiteness of purpose, a burning desire, a faith so practiced it hardened into expectation. What appears to be a sudden triumph is the visible echo of months, sometimes years, of disciplined inner rehearsal. This audiobook is an invitation to step onto that invisible battlefield with full awareness and deliberate strategy. Over the next hour, you will learn to recognize the subtle moment you begin to agree with failure and interrupt it, kindle desire until it burns away every refuge for doubt, imprint faith on the subconscious through auto-suggestion, so belief becomes reflex, build a mastermind alliance that multiplies your courage, alchemize adversity into advantage, ensuring setbacks serve rather than stop you, and finally, awaken the intuitive sixth sense that guides all great achievers. Do not treat these ideas as pleasant theories. Treat them as survival gear. Out there, beyond the borders of your skull, you will meet resistance, economic downturns, critical voices, empty bank accounts, anonymous comment sections eager to announce your limitations, but none of those adversaries possess real artillery unless invited by your own thoughts. Master the mind, and the outer siege loses its teeth. Take a slow breath. Feel the air enter, feel it leave, and notice the simple truth. You control that breath. Such control is your birthright, and it extends far beyond respiration. It reaches into focus, meaning, belief, and ultimately destiny. Hill once wrote, "You have absolute control only over one thing, your thoughts." On that single sentence hangs the weight of this entire journey. Ready your pen, for you're about to revise the script running beneath every waking moment. Where others see only fog, you will draw new borders, then march past them. The mist is lifting now. Forward. Chapter 1. The Silent Capitulation. I have walked with enough men and women of achievement to recognize the secret moment their destinies turned, and I tell you with absolute certainty that failure is never an accident delivered by cruel fate. It is first accepted, quietly and personally, long before the world supplies the evidence. That inner consent is so subtle that most people do not feel the hand signing the document, but sign it they do. Every time they dwell upon one anxious notion or another, they feel a twinge of self-doubt, allow it to lodge, and then wonder why the outer world obeys the order. I insist, therefore, that the first field of battle is thought, and that the most dangerous enemy is the whisper of surrender that arises within the mind and disguises itself as prudence. Every conversation I ever held with the builders of great fortunes revealed the same pattern. Edison failed thousands of times to coax a filament into lasting glow, yet never once did he furnish his imagination with an image of permanent defeat. Carnegie faced ridicule when he spoke of turning iron into pools of molten steel that would reshape a nation, but he refused to picture any outcome except mastery. By contrast, I have interviewed inventors, generals, and merchants who possessed equally fine intellects, yet collapsed under burdens far lighter. The difference lay not in talent, but in the moment they allowed a picture of failure to occupy the screen of imagination. They nurtured it unconsciously, watered it with repetition, fed it with emotion, and thereby executed a contract that destiny merely rubber-stamped. You may object that fear is natural, that doubt is only prudent caution. I answer that fear is indeed ancient, but it is meant to warn, never to command. The 6 basic fears, poverty, criticism, ill health, loss of love, old age, and death, will parade before your mind for as long as you draw breath. But you alone determine whether they sit on the throne or remain as passing messengers. The instant you admit poverty as a permanent prospect, circumstances hasten to confirm it. The moment you permit dread of criticism to dominate, your creative faculties retreat and your tongue grows wooden. The tragedy is not that the fear knocks. The tragedy is that you open the door, set a place at the table, and inquire whether it would prefer tea or coffee. Your words to yourself are unceasing autosuggestion, and every syllable is a seed cast into fertile soil. Some people, possessing no understanding of this law, walk about muttering that they cannot sell, cannot remember names, cannot catch a break. They look upon the harvest of those gloomy utterances and blame cruel chance, never realizing that nature merely honored the planting instructions. The subconscious mind is both a perfect servant and a merciless executioner. It accepts whatever message imagination and emotion deliver, whether that message uplifts or destroys. You need not wait for external critics, for the loudest critic already resides behind your own brow. Change that voice, and you will silence 1,000 others. I once observed a promising young salesman who, after an initial string of rejections, muttered under his breath, "I am simply not cut out for this line of work." He repeated the statement with such bitterness that it became an iron decree to his subconscious. From that day forward, every knock upon a prospect's door carried the stale perfume of defeat. His posture sagged, his tone lost conviction, his eyes pleaded rather than persuaded, and prospects, reading those silent signals, responded by confirming his prophecy. When I confronted him and insisted he write and repeat the opposite statement, "I am a master salesman, and each meeting brings me closer to success," he laughed. Yet he obeyed, first mechanically, then with a spark of belief. Within weeks his numbers rose, and within months he stood at the top of his district. The world had not changed. He had changed, and the world merely mirrored the alteration. The imagination cannot rest in vacancy. If you leave it unfurnished, it will decorate itself with borrowed furniture from yesterday's failures, newspaper headlines steeped in gloom, and the petty gossip of those who quit upon their own dreams. Whenever you discover the mind wandering down those dreary corridors, seize it firmly and usher in a vivid scene of triumph. Picture the handshake that closes the deal, the applause that greets your speech, the smiling faces of customers whose lives improved through your creation. Infuse that picture with feeling until you sense life in it. The subconscious cannot distinguish between an event emotionally imagined and an event physically lived. It accepts both as marching orders and proceeds to arrange the outer world accordingly. Permit me to illustrate with Henry Ford's great V8 engine. When he commanded his engineers to cast the entire block in a single piece, they pronounced it impossible. Months passed, molds cracked, steel warped, hope withered. Yet Ford refused to envision anything except success. His imagination rehearsed the victorious moment so often that it achieved the solidity of fact, and he spoke of the finished engine as though it already purred upon the test bench. At last, by means still called ingenious today, the engineers succeeded, and the automobile industry leapt forward. That accomplishment, celebrated in factories and showrooms, was but the delayed echo of a decision forged in Ford's private workshop of thought. Now you may ask how to arrest the silent capitulation within yourself. The method is disarmingly simple, but it demands vigilance. First, notice the instant a limiting notion arises. Awareness is half the conquest. Second, dispute its authority. Ask who issued that verdict and upon what evidence. 9 times out of 10, you will discover a childhood scolding, an unthinking jest, or a single past failure masquerading as universal law. Third, reverse the statement and proclaim the opposite condition with conviction. Do not whisper it. Speak until your own ears hear the vibration, for sound impresses the subconscious with particular force. Fourth, repeat the declaration morning and night, coupling it with a mental picture so vivid that you feel the emotion of possession. If discouragement reappears, treat it as a thief attempting to re-enter and drive it away with the same positive affirmation, armed now with stronger faith. I offer you a practical assignment. Choose one arena where you have long suspected defeat: public speaking, financial independence, harmonious marriage, vibrant health. Record a concise declaration of victory in the present tense and play it to yourself upon waking and before sleep. As you listen, close your eyes and imagine scenes that verify the statement. Do not ask how the scenes will materialize. That is the jurisdiction of infinite intelligence acting through your subconscious. Continue this experiment for 30 consecutive days, and you will observe coincidences, introductions, ideas, and bursts of courage converging as though commanded by unseen generals. What you call coincidence is simply law in motion, arranging the artillery for your triumph. Understand that surrender is not a single event, but a gentle erosion. It begins with one unchallenged doubt, gathers momentum through repetition, and finally hardens into the granite of belief. At that stage, circumstances appear to validate the belief, yet they are merely its offspring. Sever the process at its inception, and defeat cannot germinate. Nourish its opposite, faith fused to burning desire, and the world, like malleable clay upon the potter's wheel, must assume the form you hold within. As we advance into the study of desire, remember this foundation. You are sovereign of the one realm that determines all others. Guard that throne with unsleeping vigilance, and no external empire will dare dictate your fate. Chapter 2. Desire, Fire in the Forge. Desire, in its purest strain, is the incandescent fuel that turns vague wishes into living certainties. I have stood beside inventors whose laboratories reeked of burned filament and failure. I have watched their fingers tremble from exhaustion, yet their eyes blazed with a heat even the most stubborn setback could not dampen. That fire was desire, white-hot, single-minded, merciless toward every excuse. Understand, no mind harboring this flame can remain poor, timid, or defeated for long, because burning desire is not merely an emotion, it is a command issued to the universe through the medium of the subconscious, compelling events, people, and ideas to arrange themselves in obedience. I first discovered the power of such desire when I interviewed Edwin C. Barnes, a man of modest means who announced, to no one in particular, that he would become Thomas Edison's business partner. He did not say he wished to work for Edison, nor that he hoped merely to shake the great inventor's hand. He declared partnership, and did so at a time when he possessed neither money for the train fare to Orange, New Jersey, nor any letter of introduction. His wardrobe was threadbare, his prospects laughable. Yet the vision within him burned with such clarity that circumstances buckled and conformed. He talked his way into Edison's plant as a lowly assistant, polished engines and swept floors, and for 5 long years nursed the coal of intention until it grew red with heat. Then came the day Edison unveiled the dictating machine that his own salesman scorned as impractical. Barnes saw an opportunity roaring toward him like a locomotive and leapt aboard. He sold those machines with evangelical fervor, proved their market, and earned the right, finally, to sign contracts beside the wizard whose mind he had resolved to join. The world honored Barnes's success. I honored the desire that foretold it. You may ask how such a fire is struck within one's breast. It is not fanned into life by casual wishing. The majority of men and women want riches, health, or fame, in the flabby sense that they might want a gentle breeze on a hot afternoon, pleasant but hardly vital. Burning desire differs as flame differs from smoke. It is born when a thought is repeated, emotionalized and clenched so tightly against the chest that it leaves no chamber for contradictory notions. The mind, thus occupied, becomes a forge. Each repetition of the idea hammers it into glowing metal. Each visualization shapes the metal into a tool. Each spoken affirmation cools the tool into form. When at last the subconscious accepts the pattern as reality, it marshals every faculty, memory, intuition, creative imagination, and hurls them at the target with a velocity no external opposition can equal. Observe a truth too often neglected. Desire must be definite. A sailor cannot reach a harbor by merely wanting to sail. He chooses a port, plots a course, and sets the prow. Likewise, the subconscious demands exact instruction. I desire wealth is a breeze lost at sea. I will possess $1 million by the 1st day of January, 1933, in return for rendering direct, specialized service in the field of industrial organization is a gale that drives the vessel. The date, the sum, the service offered. These details transform idle hope into marching orders. Write them in ink. Speak them aloud until the words carve grooves upon your consciousness deeper than any groove carved by fear. Permit me a confession. I once doubted the ruthless potency of this method until a miner from the hills of Kentucky proved it upon my own skepticism. He arrived at my office with calloused hands and a glint in his eye that startled me. Producing a tattered ledger, he pointed to a figure of $200,000. "This," he announced, "is the price a man will pay for my coal property before Christmas." The calendar showed midsummer. The coal vein had produced modestly, and market prices were low. Still, the man spoke with such stoked certainty that I recorded his prediction. He returned in December, the same ledger now containing a signed contract from a steel company. Price, $200,000. The ink barely dry before the holiday bells. Reason scoffed. Desire overruled reason and commanded result. Burning desire, however, is not blind. It must be yoked to organized planning, else it degenerates into feverish fantasy. Yet planning without desire is a skeleton without flesh, rattling but powerless. The two, wedded, make an army. I advise students to sit each night in silent counsel with themselves, reviewing the day's progress toward the definite goal. This practice has twin virtues. It feeds the flame with attention and reveals flaws in strategy before they can harden into costly habits. Where the plan falters, modify. Where the desire flickers, stoke. Never permit one day to close without watering the seed of purpose. You will discover that as desire grows, it transmutes the very texture of consciousness. Obstacles once viewed as stone walls appear now as stepping stones. Criticism, that poisoned arrow which slays the timid, becomes a whetstone upon which you sharpen conviction. Adversity reveals itself as fertile ground wherein seeds of equal or greater benefit are buried, awaiting only the shovel of perseverance to lift them into light. Burning desire renders a man or woman nearly immune to ridicule because the inner image is so vivid that external opinion fades to a whisper. This immunity is not arrogance, it is singleness of vision. Let me illustrate by recalling how Fanny Hurst, the novelist, sold her first story. For 4 years, she faced relentless rejection. 36 lean months, during which every magazine in New York returned her manuscripts untouched or annotated with curt refusals. Yet each envelope that clattered onto her doorstep only tightened her grip upon the picture she carried, shelves filled with her printed volumes, check stubs bearing her name, readers weeping or laughing at her characters. She copied those visions onto paper, read them aloud each dawn, and marched into editors' offices with the gait of one who had already arrived. At last, a single editor surrendered, then another, until her stories adorned the very magazines that once dismissed her. The public hailed an overnight sensation. She smiled, knowing the night had lasted 4 years and was lit throughout by the lamp of burning desire. Some caution that desire tethered too tightly can breed obsession. They misunderstand. Obsession is merely desire freed from compromise. So long as the object of pursuit harms no person and offers value in exchange, obsession is a virtue, not a vice. The sun obsesses upon its course. We call it constancy. The seed obsesses upon becoming the oak. We call it nature. Should a human being do less with the unrepeatable gift of consciousness? Yet beware the counterfeit, a passion that flickers only when circumstances are favorable. Burning desire endures storm as readily as calm. It feeds upon failure as dry timber feeds flame, converting disappointment into greater heat. I recall a young engineer whose plan to patent a new carburetor was shattered when a rival filed days earlier. Where a lesser spirit would have quit, he intensified his desire, studied the rival's blueprint, and invented an auxiliary device that rendered both carburetors obsolete. The setback served not to extinguish, but to enlarge his fire, ultimately propelling him beyond the rival's reach. Now I invite you to kindle your own furnace. Retire tonight with a sheet of paper and inscribe, in deliberate language, the precise possession or condition you intend to secure, the date by which it shall become yours, and the clear service you will render in return. Do not stop until the wording strikes you like a hammer of truth. Place the paper where your eyes must greet it upon waking and again before sleep. Read it aloud, with feeling, as though addressing a royal audience, for indeed you are addressing the sovereign powers within. Each repetition drips oil upon the wick, each visualization fans the flame higher, each act taken in harmony with the vision adds coal to the furnace. Presently, the heat will rise to so fine a pitch that indecision melts, opportunity softens, and circumstance flows like molten metal into the mold you designed. Remember always, where burning desire resides, failure finds no hospitable lodging, for the mind ablaze is a citadel impregnable to doubt. In the next chapter, we shall examine how faith, handmaiden to desire, transforms this inner conflagration into an outward chain of events so swift and sure that observers call it a miracle. Yet you will know it for what it is, the lawful answer to a mind that dared to command its destiny. Chapter 3. Faith in Motion. I have said that burning desire is the spark that lights the furnace of achievement, yet flame alone is not sufficient to bend raw ore into useful steel. A blast furnace requires a constant current of air to keep the fire alive. And so your desire demands a steady wind of belief if it is to grow white-hot and transmute vision into fact. That wind is faith, living, vocal, emotionalized faith, deliberately generated through the power of autosuggestion and directed toward a single definite end. Without it, desire smolders and finally gutters out. With it, ordinary men and women bend circumstance as surely as the blacksmith bends iron at his anvil. When I first visited Orville and Wilbur Wright in their humble Dayton workshop, I expected to meet mechanics chasing a fanciful dream. Instead, I encountered two quiet souls whose faith was so palpable it seemed to thrum in the very boards beneath our feet. Their neighbors ridiculed the notion of a man becoming airborne. The press dismissed them as eccentrics, yet the brothers spoke of lift, drag, and control surfaces with the calm certainty of farmers describing tomorrow's sunrise. They had spent hundreds of evenings repeating to themselves the conviction that human flight was not merely possible, but already achieved in the unseen realm of principle, awaiting only the proper apparatus. That repetition soaked so deeply into their subconscious minds that doubt found no entry. Each failure at Kitty Hawk, therefore, registered not as evidence against success, but as a fresh cue guiding them closer to the correct formula. On the day their craft rose from the sand, the outer world gasped at a miracle, while the brothers simply nodded, recognizing the physical echo of a truth long established within. Such faith is no gift reserved for inventors. It is a discipline available to any earnest seeker. The subconscious mind resembles a phonograph, ever ready to imprint the grooves we choose, and it plays back those grooves until they dominate our conscious conduct. The words you murmur in the privacy of your own thoughts are the stylus. Emotion supplies the downward force that cuts the channel. Repetition fixes the record indelibly. Take care, then, what melody you engrave, for your life will dance to its tune. Several years ago, a young stenographer came to me complaining that every advancement eluded her. She labored diligently, arrived early, stayed late, yet promotions bypassed her desk as though she were invisible. I asked her to repeat aloud the first sentence that rose in her mind when she thought of success. She blushed, hesitated, and finally whispered, "I'm just not the type they notice." That single confession explained the whole of her difficulty. Her subconscious had accepted invisibility as her proper station and accordingly filtered from her awareness every hint of opportunity. I instructed her to craft a new declaration. My competence commands recognition and worthy positions pursue me, and to recite it with feeling each morning and night while picturing herself seated in a superior's chair, issuing confident instructions. Within 3 months, her employer reorganized the department and chose her to supervise the very clerks whose footsteps had previously marched past. The raise in salary delighted her, but what thrilled me was the greater treasure. She had proved to herself that belief, once implanted, compels the outer world to comply. Understand that autosuggestion must be fortified with emotion. Cold words skip like pebbles across the surface of the subconscious and leave no mark. Speak your affirmation until it quickens your pulse, until you feel a tingle at the base of the spine. until the image behind your closed eyes glows brighter than the lamplight in the room. In that charged instant, you stamp the message upon the inner chamber where invisible forces manufacture tomorrow's facts. Repeat the process daily, for a truth-driven nail-deep today will loosen its hold if neglected tomorrow. Consistency is the hand that tightens every rivet of faith. Skeptics cry that such methods deceive oneself, mistaking faith for folly. I reply that every human enterprise rests upon belief before a single stone is laid. The architect unrolls blueprints for a bridge that does not yet span the river. The farmer sows seed in a field that shows not one blade of wheat. The merchant orders inventory for customers who have not yet strolled through the door. These acts are celebrated as foresight, yet they are nothing more than faith given practical expression. Autosuggestion is the tool by which the mind accomplishes internally what the architect, farmer, and merchant accomplish with steel, seed, and stock. It drafts, plants, and equips a world that only later materializes for the senses. I would caution, however, that faith cannot adhere to a mind divided against itself. If you affirm prosperity in the morning and brood over unpaid bills at night, you pour water upon your own embers. Tell the subconscious a single tale. If new problems arise, and they will, frame them instantly as puzzles to be solved, not verdicts of defeat. A mind trained to respond with the phrase, "There is a way, and I shall find it," keeps its furnace stoked and its turbines turning. You will discover a curious phenomenon as your faith matures. Intuition flares to life. Hunches, sudden insights, and chance conversations will appear precisely when needed, as though unseen couriers were arranging your timetable. This is no accident. The subconscious, convinced of your destination, scouts ahead along countless unseen paths and whispers back the directions through feeling. Trust those nudges. They are the semaphore flags of infinite intelligence signaling your next correct step. Some years past, I stood on the platform of a small-town station, waiting for a train to Chicago, when a stranger approached carrying a worn satchel stuffed with manuscript pages. He recognized me from a lecture and asked whether I would review his book of principles. His eyes shone with the same gleam I had observed in Edison's and Ford's. The manuscript was raw, yet his conviction radiated like heat from a furnace door. I advised him briefly, pointed him toward a sympathetic publisher, and 2 years later, that manuscript, revised and retitled, climbed newspaper columns as a bestseller. Many attribute his overnight fortune to a happy coincidence that he met a helpful author on a railway platform. I attribute it to the magnetic pull of faith that set both our feet upon the same plank at the same hour. Let us now test the steel of your own conviction. Tonight, before sleep steals over your senses, sit in stillness and recite aloud the definite chief aim you composed in the previous chapter. Feel each word as a live coal. See the fulfilled desire as vividly as though your physical eyes rested upon it. Then declare, with all the authority you can summon, that you possess unshakable faith in your ability to realize this aim, and that your subconscious mind is even now directing you toward every fact, contact, and circumstance required. Drift to rest upon that thought. When you rise at dawn, repeat the exercise before facing the day's duties. Perform this ritual for 30 consecutive days without omission. If you falter, begin anew, for the subconscious tolerates no absentee commanders. Mark this well. The moment you introduce faith into desire, you sign a spiritual contract that obliges the universe to cooperate. The date of delivery may not be printed upon the invoice, but delivery is certain, provided you keep your signature bold and unblurred by doubt.
So firmly have I witnessed this law in operation that I stake my name upon it. Plant faith, water it with emotion, prune it with repetition, and its harvest will astonish you. And now, with your furnace roaring and the great bellows of faith pumping ever more air into the blaze, we proceed to forge the tools of organized action and persistence that the molten vision within may be cast into structures the world can touch.
Chapter 4. The Master Mind Shield. No great fortune is built by one mind alone, but every great business is conceived in one mind. The furnace itself, the structure that holds and intensifies the heat, is made from allied intelligence, while faith and desire supply the oxygen and flame respectively. I refer to this framework as the master mind, and I implore you to think of it as a real engine whose horsepower can be determined, directed, and increased as you see fit, rather than as a nice metaphor. A third intangible force, a sort of unseen battery from which each member may draw strength beyond his personal store, is created when two or more persons integrate their knowledge and energy in a spirit of perfect harmony. When that force is used, it becomes a compass in the face of ambiguity, an armor against doubt, and an accelerant that propels plans to completion at a rate that is impossible for lone effort to equal. Consider Andrew Carnegie, from whose lips I first heard the phrase, though I later clothed it in more formal dress. He confessed that his celebrated genius for steel would have rusted into mediocrity had he not surrounded himself with men whose skills outstripped his own in every technical field. His true genius, he said, lay in discerning character, inspiring loyalty, and weaving disparate talents into a single, humming organism. That organism, once constituted, generated ideas and solutions no one's mind at the boardroom table could have produced in isolation. Carnegie's fortune, therefore, serves not merely as a monument to ambition, but as a laboratory demonstration of the mastermind principle in full operation. You may protest that you lack access to magnates and inventors, that the circle of your acquaintance is too humble to qualify. Dismiss that doubt at once. I have witnessed the mastermind alight in settings far removed from marble offices, among farmers pooling machinery during hard seasons, among seamstresses who gathered evenings to share patterns and clients, among students who traded lectures and tips until each surpassed classmates better gifted on paper. The secret requirement is not fame nor wealth, but harmony of purpose. Two laborers united in singleness of aim outstrip one billionaire distracted by inner discord. Harmony, however, is a delicate fabric and must be woven thread by thread. Begin with one associate whose temperament complements rather than duplicates your own. If your talent lies in vision, ally with someone whose gift is detail. If you bring enthusiasm, seek a partner who embodies steady judgment. Speak your definite chief aim aloud together until the words strike both hearts like the same hammer. Write between you a brief memorandum spelling who will render what service and review it weekly in candor, altering it whenever growth demands. Let no resentment fester, for rancor is acid that corrodes the battery terminals and drains the current. When Henry Ford embarked on his quest to motorize the world, he assembled a modest council each Friday evening after factory hours, engineers, draftsmen, a curious young poet, and an accountant with a gift for shorthand. They talked shop, yes, but also philosophy, mechanics, and economics, each subject fueling another's imagination. From those informal gatherings emerged innovations in assembly line logistics and labor relations that confounded Detroit rivals who possessed far larger research budgets. The newspapers later credited Ford's solitary brilliance. Ford, chuckling, assured me that brilliance arrived weekly, in a worn lunch pail, carried by whichever friend happened to uncover a fresh angle on an old puzzle. Yet power, like fire, demands a chimney, lest it burn the house. Guard your mastermind against the cold draught of negativity. There exists a corrosive counterpart to harmonious alliance. Call it the misery mind, wherein chronic complainers, cynics, and amateur prophets of doom mingle their doubts until they create a fog that suffocates initiative. I have seen young entrepreneurs, glowing with promise, attend one luncheon with such a group and emerge grey-faced, their grand design suddenly riddled with invisible termites of uncertainty. Choose your counsel as a gardener selects seed, with ruthless regard for future harvest. Do not overlook the value of books as silent members of your league. When I lacked direct access to Abraham Lincoln's patient wisdom or Benjamin Franklin's indefatigable curiosity, I placed their biographies beside my desk and invited their spirits into deliberation. By reading a chapter and meditating upon their choices, I felt their counsel as keenly as if they'd leaned across the table. The subconscious does not distinguish between living voices and printed ones. It gathers all impressions and blends them into that mysterious third mind whose sparks we call inspiration. Let me offer a method I've practiced these many years. Each Sunday evening, I sit quietly and summon one by one the mental images of 9 advisors, some alive, some long departed, whom I admire for specific traits: Edison for persistence, Lincoln for balance, Darwin for observation, Emerson for poetic perception, Carnegie for organizational genius, and so forth. I pose to this invisible cabinet whatever challenge besets me and record the replies that rise in thought. Skeptics deride the exercise as fancy, yet the counsel I have harvested has guided me more profitably than any commercial consultancy could. Imagination, when directed by purposeful faith, opens a wireless station to universal intelligence. The mastermind simply widens the bandwidth by which those signals arrive. As you recruit your own league, remember the law of compensation. Give value before you expect it. An alliance forged solely to siphon another's knowledge or influence soon withers. Offer your enthusiasm, your specialized skill, your willingness to shoulder burdens others shun. Pay the price of loyalty, punctuality, and ethical dealing, and you will draw to yourself collaborators whose very presence compounds your effectiveness. I have observed another curious dividend of the mastermind: heightened courage. A single individual may brave the storm, yet even the stoutest heart sometimes nods to fear in lonely midnight hours. Bring that individual into a circle of harmonized minds, and fear dissipates like mist under morning sun. Ideas once considered risky acquire the glow of inevitability. Obstacles shrink to proper scale. The mind, relieved of isolation, rediscovers its native audacity. That is why generals ride the front in pairs, why explorers carry a companion even into frozen wastelands, why the solitary merchant prospers only after enlisting partners who believe as fervently as he does. You may launch your alliance this very week. Identify one person, colleague, mentor, spouse, or trusted friend who shares even a fragment of your objective. Invite that individual to coffee and unveil your definite chief aim with unembarrassed conviction. Ask what mutual advantage might spring from combining efforts. Agree upon the first small action you will pursue jointly before another sunrise. Momentum, like interest, compounds most rapidly at the start. Give it something substantive on which to accrue. Soon, your partnership will magnetize a second member, then a third, each attracted by the vitality that radiates from a united pair. As the circle grows, codify its purpose in writing and read the document at every meeting. Celebrate each victory, however slight, for celebration is the banquet that nourishes further effort. Keep the group small enough to maintain intimacy, yet large enough to embrace every competence your aim requires. Should discord arise, address it swiftly. Lingering resentment is a thief that steals more energy than any market downturn could. When you look back upon your greatest achievements, you will discover, as I did, that their linchpin was not solitary brilliance, but shared belief. A fellowship of minds convinced of a common destiny and pledged to lift one another across each ravine. Desire lit the fire, faith fanned it brighter, but the mastermind encircled the forge with stone and sent the heat roaring skyward until the world, feeling its warmth, came close to see what new marvels were being wrought. Thus armed with an unbreakable shield of allied intelligence, we advance to the disciplines of imagination, organized planning, and relentless persistence, by which the molten metal of your expanded power shall be poured into molds of tangible, enduring wealth. Chapter 5. Imagination in Action. Imagination is the drafting room of the soul, yet a blueprint unguided by the hammer of action and the rivet of persistence is nothing but a decorative sketch tacked to a forgotten wall. I have walked through littered attics of gifted men who once brimmed with luminous ideas, machines that would cut labor in half, novels that would stir the public conscience, enterprises that might have liberated whole communities from poverty. Their plans lay yellowing beneath dust, mute testimony that imagination by itself cannot erect a single arch. The mind must first design, then the hands must build, and between the conception and the completion stands persistence as vigilant foreman, insisting the work proceed when enthusiasm wanes and obstacles rise like unexpected scaffolding in the dark. I learned this lesson keenly while tracing the early ventures of Alexander Graham Bell. He possessed an imagination trained to hear in silence the faint pulses of possibility. When he conceived the telephone, many contemporaries applauded the novelty, yet predicted commercial futility. Bell, however, refused to allow their doubts residency. He sketched component after component, then, crucially, he hurried to his workshop and translated pencil strokes into copper coils and diaphragms. Night after night, he soldered and tested, and when tests failed, he returned to the drawing board not as a pessimist tallying defeats, but as an architect gathering measurements for the next iteration. Months of disappointment sharpened his inner picture rather than blurring it. Finally, on an evening thick with the smell of insulating lacquer, his instrument carried the first clear human words over wire. Newspapers heralded a marvel. Yet that marvel was merely imagination given flesh by unrelenting application of labor, lubricated with stubborn endurance. You, too, hold within your consciousness the germ of at least one idea capable of altering your destiny, and perhaps the destiny of thousands. The vital question is whether you will permit that germ to germinate, whether you will knead faith into the dough and place it into the oven of disciplined effort until it rises. Most people commit two errors. Either they imagine grandly yet stall at the threshold of exertion, or they labor feverishly on a plan conceived by another and feel no inner fire to sustain them. A mind-sourced ideal coupled with rigorous work is the unbeatable tandem. One supplies vision, the other manifests substance. United, they roll forward with the momentum of a locomotive. I have often advised students to set aside one quiet hour each day devoted wholly to creative imagination. During that hour, detach from present limitations and ask the mind how your definite chief aim may be reached by fresh, untried avenues. Record every notion, however whimsical, for whimsy today may prove cornerstone tomorrow. The critical move arrives at the close of the hour. Choose one practicable idea and schedule a specific action within 24 hours. Compose a letter, telephone a prospect, sketch a prototype, or read a technical chapter. The subconscious, observing that you treat its gifts with respect, will dispatch richer cargo on subsequent voyages. Yet no plan, however radiant in conception, passes the river of reality without being pelted by stones of delay, ridicule, or plain mechanical difficulty. At this crossing, persistence becomes your ferryman. Persistence is not grim stubbornness. It is cheerful loyalty to one's own vision. It supplies fresh reserves of faith each time frustration threatens mutiny. I recall interviewing Colonel Sanders long before his smiling visage adorned restaurant signs. He traveled from diner to diner with a battered recipe box, presenting his spice formula to weary owners who waved him away before he could unfold the paper. Rejection followed rejection, 900 times by his own ledger, yet the old gentleman polished his shoes each dawn as though certain success awaited just beyond the next county line. At last, one proprietor tasted the chicken, paused, and said yes. The chain that blossomed afterward is only the public chapter. The hidden prologue was persistently courting rejection until rejection surrendered. There exists a secret mechanism by which persistence amplifies imagination. Each rebuff encountered forces the mind to devise modifications. Thus, adversity functions as a whetstone sharpening creative faculty. A plan untested by resistance often conceals fatal cracks. A plan beaten like iron upon the anvil of difficulty rings truer with each strike. Edison remarked that if he had succeeded in producing a suitable filament on the third try, he might never have uncovered the superior processes revealed by the 3,000 trials that followed. Persistence, therefore, is not mere endurance. It is evolutionary pressure molding crude ideas into masterpieces. Let no one assume that sustained effort must be joyless. When your imagination burns with vivid desire, work becomes exhilarating, for each hour of labor is a brushstroke completing a picture first glimpsed within. The sculptor sweats happily because every chip of marble reveals more of the form he already sees in wholeness. So too, your late-night ledger entries, your rehearsed speeches, your patient customer calls, all are chisels tapping away superfluity. If fatigue whispers that you have earned a pause, consult the image in your mind's gallery. If it glows intensely enough, you will find energy renewed. Of course, persistence sometimes demands a strategic retreat. There is no valor in battering the wrong door until your fists bleed. If honest analysis proves a plan unsound, imagination must draft a new door and action must knock there instead. What endures is not blind repetition, but unwavering fidelity to the ultimate purpose. One may change methods freely, provided the captain never confuses course adjustments with abandonment of voyage. I once counseled a young writer whose novel had attracted 60 consecutive rejection slips. He contemplated quitting literature forever. I urged him to examine the letters, list every criticism, and spend a month rewriting with those notes in mind. He returned a year later with a published volume whose sales eclipsed the combined printings of half the editors who had spurned him. His success owed less to my advice than to the stamina that enabled him to apply it. He discovered that each dismissal contained a clue, and persistence taught him to mine those clues rather than curse their messengers. You stand now at the tripod where imagination, action, and endurance converge. Picture your aim in full color and bold relief. Commit at once to a tangible step, however modest, that carries the concept from ether to earth. Then pledge yourself to dogged continuity of effort, fully expecting the universe to test your sincerity. When tests arrive, and they will, meet them with the smile of an alchemist who knows every blow of resistance is forging a more refined gold. Press onward, for in the next chapter we shall confront adversity itself and learn the sublime art of extracting fortune from misfortune, transforming each apparent defeat into a stepping stone that lifts you higher than unbroken victory ever could. Chapter 6. The Alchemy of Adversity. A miner who abandons the shaft at the first scrape of his pick against granite forfeits every vein of gold that lies a single inch beyond his discouragement. So it is with the majority of earnest seekers. They retreat when fate appears to clap an immovable boulder across their path, never suspecting that the boulder is composed of the very ore they came to claim. I have lived long enough, and interviewed enough victors and vanquished alike, to declare with finality that every disappointment hides a dowry of equal or greater benefit. The visible form of misfortune is often grim, yet beneath its rough casing gleams a providential core for those who refuse to be dismayed by the wrapping. Reflect upon the story of Charles Goodyear, which I investigated while preparing my earlier manuscripts. Failed ventures had driven him to debtor's prison. Creditors hounded his family. His experiments with India rubber left him sickly and nearly penniless. One winter's evening, in a drafty workshop, a lump of his treated rubber fell onto a hot stove. Instead of melting into sticky tar as expected, the compound charred on the surface, yet retained a springy resilience within. Goodyear examined the blackened sample, sensed promise where another might have seen only ruin, and thus discovered vulcanization, a process that marched rubber out of the novelty booths and into the machinery of modern industry. Misfortune, smelling of burnt resin and bankruptcy, had disguised a gift, and only his indefatigable curiosity unmasked it. The mechanism behind this alchemy is simple once grasped. Adversity forces the mind to search for detours. Search quickens ingenuity. Ingenuity reveals resources overlooked in fairer weather, and the newly discovered resource frequently surpasses the value of the goal first sought. Had Goodyear thrived at his initial dry goods trade, he might have lived a life of modest comfort and departed history unremarked. The furnace of failure melted away complacency, leaving him alert to a revelation that remade the world. I witnessed the same principle within George Eastman, a clerk in a Rochester bank during the 1870s. He saved to buy a vacation, intending to photograph the journey, but the plate-coated glass equipment proved too bulky for travel, and the excursion fell through. Disheartened but curious, he pondered whether a handier device could replace the heavy apparatus. From that single thwarted holiday blossomed the Kodak camera, and the phrase, "You press the button, we do the rest," a slogan that seeded fortunes for himself and memories for millions. The cancelled trip became the keystone of an empire. Now, some will protest that adversity also wrecks lives, that many a man has been crushed beyond recovery. I concede that catastrophe can cripple the spirit, yet only when the sufferer surrenders the prerogative of interpretation. Pain is a fact. Defeat is a verdict rendered by the sufferer himself. Two merchants may lose their warehouse to fire on the same night. One reads the ashes as doom, the other sees cleared land upon which to erect a larger, better situated facility. The difference lies neither in insurance policies nor bank balances. It resides between the ears, where thought decides whether to transmute setback into seed. I recall the steel strike of 1919. Which choked furnaces across Pittsburgh and idled thousands. Andrew Carnegie, though advanced in years, toured the silent mills and remarked to me afterward that labor's anger, though costly, would compel management to re-evaluate wages, housing, and education, improvements he deemed overdue. He predicted that any company bold enough to meet the men halfway would harvest unprecedented loyalty when the furnaces roared again. Subsequent history vindicated him. Firms that adopted his stance emerged stronger, while those that clung to resentment limped along, beset by recurring unrest. Carnegie's genius, so often lauded for technical foresight, consisted equally in his capacity to spot profit in volcanic social upheaval. You too may practice this art. When confronted by apparent disaster, resist the primitive impulse to label it final. Ask instead, where is the seed of benefit and how do I cultivate it? The very act of posing the question shifts the mind from victimhood to craftsmanship, from despair to creative alertness. The subconscious, thus directed, rummages through its warehouse of impressions and returns with possibilities the conscious intellect alone could never inventory under pressure. I have experienced this phenomenon so many times that I now greet setbacks with a spark of curiosity, certain that somewhere within the rubble lies a gem. Yet do not mistake passivity for philosophy. Benefit must be mined. It seldom gleams upon the surface. After my first book failed to attract a publisher, I forced myself each dawn to write a fresh 1,000 words, refining my ideas, improving my prose, reducing each lesson to a clearer principle. Rejection slips piled high, but so did experience, until editors who sneered at my earlier drafts now praised the concision of my revised chapters. The adversity did not depart. It transformed me until there remained no obstacle left for it to overcome. Adversity also winnows companions. Those whose allegiance depended upon ease flutter away, leaving space for new allies of sterner fiber. The mastermind, discussed earlier, gains purity through the fire. Fair-weather voices fall silent, and those who remain prove themselves as steadfast as granite. Adversity, therefore, serves as a recruiter and disciplinarian, forging an inner counsel fit for any campaign that follows. If you harbor doubt, conduct a small experiment. Select one recent annoyance, a lost client, a delayed shipment, a public criticism, and write beneath it 3 hypothetical advantages that could sprout from this loss. Perhaps the prompt to refine your product, establish a secondary supplier, or articulate your value with greater eloquence. Leave the list on your desk. Within a week, you will observe at least one benefit germinating along precisely the imagined line, and you will comprehend that your conscious act of enumeration watered a seed already buried in the situation. Remember that gold is most often found in places men believe barren. The prospector's map of life is therefore counterintuitive. It marks frustration, disappointment, and apparent catastrophe as the richest diggings. Equip yourself with the pickaxe of inquiry and the lantern of persistence, and venture into those caverns where less adventurous souls dare not tread. Should the tunnel collapse, wriggle onward through the breach, for it may open into a lode unguessed at from the safer route above. I have been called an optimist, sometimes with amusement, sometimes with contempt. Very well. If optimism means the unshakable conviction that intelligence can extract victory from the jaws of hardship, then I plead guilty. My optimism is not naive. It is an empirical conclusion drawn from a lifetime of observing men who triumphed precisely because fate denied them an easy road. Adversity is the cost of admission to greatness, and those who would occupy the front row must pay in full. Stand, then, amid whatever wreckage confronts you, brush the soot from your sleeves, and declare aloud, "Within this difficulty hides a treasure, and I will not rest until I have unearthed it." Speak the sentence until your heart believes it. Let action follow swiftly. When at last you hold the gleaming prize aloft, you will look back upon the hardship not as an enemy, but as a master craftsman, stern, exacting, yet magnificently generous to those who endure his tutelage. Chapter 7. The Sixth Sense of Success Consciousness. There comes a point on every triumphant march when maps grow vague, compasses spin, and the most meticulous plan confronts a fork that logic cannot chart. In that moment, the successful man consults a faculty that textbooks scarcely mention, yet sages proclaim as the crown of all other powers, the sixth sense. I speak not of occult trickery, but of a refined perception, an interior whisper that blossoms only after desire, faith, organized effort and persistence have done their disciplined work. It is the still, small voice that says, "Turn here," while reason idles, that nudges you to telephone a hesitant prospect at the precise hour her resistance thaws, that flashes the outline of a fresh solution across the mind, just as the committee declares the problem insoluble. I first gave this faculty its name while compiling the principles you now study. During interviews with scores of illustrious achievers, I noticed a common confession, murmured shyly as though fearing ridicule. Each relied, at critical junctures, upon an inexplicable hunch. Edison spoke of the hand of something beyond figures guiding his final choice of filament. Luther Burbank credited an inner picture that unfolds like a seed pod for his botanical breakthroughs. And Henry Ford admitted that his boldest business leaps followed a sudden conviction which appeared whole, needing no proof, only obedience. These men differed in upbringing, temperament, and trade, yet all agreed that the greatest coups were sealed by intuition's last-minute seal, arriving when intellect had labored to the brink of exhaustion. Why does this signal visit only certain minds? Because, like a telegraph line, it demands a clear, well-insulated conduit. Doubt is static, fear is corrosion, idleness is a severed wire. Each principle we have studied serves to lay and protect the cable. Burning desire arouses the operator to listen. Faith keeps his hand upon the receiver. Persistent action sends steady current through the line. The mastermind multiplies voltage. Imagination fashions ever finer apparatus. And adversity, paradoxically, tightens every joint through repeated strain. At last, the circuit hums without interruption, and consciousness, thus tuned, begins to intercept messages broadcast continuously from the central dynamo of infinite intelligence. You have already felt that electricity in modest sparks. The name recalled just in time, the route chosen on impulse that saves an hour, the stranger who materializes bearing precisely the skill or resource your venture lacked. Multiply those incidents by 1,000, and you glimpse the harvest that awaits once the sixth sense ripens. Yet cultivation requires deliberate practice. Reserve a brief interval each day for quietude, not petition nor mental rehearsal, but receptive stillness. Sit with a notebook open, breathe until the chatter of ordinary thought subsides, and pose a single question regarding your chief aim. Resist the urge to manufacture answers. Simply notice impressions as they drift across the mind's screen. Note them without judgment. Most will seem trivial at first, a colored image, a fragment of a phrase, but record them faithfully. In weeks or months, you will discover patterns, as though a mosaic were tiling itself piece by piece upon those pages. One dawn you will awaken and behold the design entire, and you will wonder how you ever considered it mysterious, so self-evident will its symmetry appear. Beware, however, the counterfeit voice of reckless impulse. True intuition carries a calm authority, never the feverish clamor of desperation. It feels like recognition, A serene, of course, dawns within the chest even before the head convenes debate. The test is consistency. A genuine hunch withstands the light of morning, the scrutiny of allies, the discipline of written expression. Write your intuitive directive in clear language and sleep upon it. If certainty greets you again at sunrise, proceed. If doubt swells, thank the muse politely and wait. Infinite intelligence does not begrudge repetition. It will circle back with clearer instructions once your receptivity improves. Permit me a personal testimony. While completing my original research, I wrestled with a final chapter, seeking a unifying principle that would bind the preceding laws. Night after night, I paced my study until fatigue dulled thought to a blur. One stormy evening, overcome by frustration, I collapsed into the chair, closed my eyes, and surrendered the problem. In that surrender, a vivid tableau unfurled. I saw my own manuscript placed in the hands of millions whose lives would be altered beyond my reckoning. With the vision came a phrase, "Think and grow rich," so crisp I started upright. The title seemed audacious, even arrogant, yet each time I questioned it, the inner voice repeated with unruffled composure, "Write it so." I obeyed, and the world's reception proved the wisdom of that midnight counsel. So will it be for you. When all visible resources line up against your purpose, the sixth sense may reveal an invisible bridge. When doubt whispers that the hour is too late, intuition may point to a dawn whose sunlight you alone can foresee. Make it your ally. Court it with disciplined thought, honor it with swift execution, and guard its channel from the rust of fear. In the grand architecture of success, this faculty forms the steeple, last to rise, first to catch the morning light, its silent bell ringing guidance across the valley where ordinary eyes still grope in pre-dawn shadow. Hold fast, for our journey nears completion. One chapter remains, in which we shall bind desire, faith, organized effort, persistence, adversity's gift, and this newly awakened intuition into a daily regimen, a living charter, so that failure may never again secure a foothold within the citadel of your mind. Chapter 8. Signed by the Subconscious. Every contract to hold legal weight requires two signatures. One belongs to the conscious mind, the part of you that dreams, declares, and decides. The other must be penned by that deeper authority which never speaks aloud, yet rules the kingdom of circumstance. Until the subconscious adds its flowing hand, your finest resolutions remain unenforceable promises, noble but not yet law. This final chapter exists for one purpose only, to ensure the inner signing takes place. Think of the subconscious as the registrar of deeds in a bustling county seat. Citizens may announce intentions all day long, opening shops, staking claims, marrying, bequeathing fortunes, but nothing becomes official until it is recorded in that quiet office below the courthouse stairs. The registrar's stamp turns a wish into property, an engagement into marriage, transfer into title. So too does your subconscious convert airy declaration into hard, bankable reality once it judges a purpose absolute. But the registrar is shrewd. It will not ink its seal for mere enthusiasm, nor for eloquence alone. It demands 4 proofs of seriousness. First, continuity. A goal spoken once is treated as gossip. Spoken twice daily for 30 consecutive days, it is docketed for review, persisted in for 90. The clerk begins drawing up papers. Repetition is the drumbeat that marches desire past the front gates of habit and into the throne room where commands are issued. Second, emotion. The subconscious reads feelings as fluent shorthand while it mistrusts dry logic. Deliver your aim wrapped in the thunder of conviction, the warmth of gratitude, the glow of anticipated triumph. Where emotion surges, the registrar hears urgency and leans forward. Third, specificity. Vague phrases drift past the desk like half-filled forms. Someday I'll be wealthy. I'd like to travel. And are promptly placed in the indifferent file. State the amount, the date, the service you will render, and the value you will exchange. Precision acts as notarization. Fourth, sacrifice. Paper deeds require filing fees. Mental deeds require payment in time, study, and courageous action. The subconscious waits to see whether you will tender those coins. When you do up early to rehearse a presentation or stay up late to refine a prototype, it records the transaction as irrevocable. Let us apply these proofs in practice. Tonight, after the household dims, sit at a desk large enough to honor what you're about to draft. Take a blank sheet of sturdy paper, title it, My Mental Contract of Achievement. Write in longhand, for the slower movement of the pen cauterizes memory, that you, in full possession of your faculties, hereby pledge to attain the specific objective already carved into earlier chapters of this journey. Itemize the compensation you will give in return, the date by which delivery must occur, and the allies whose talents you will marshal. End with a clause of persistence. I will renew this covenant morning and night until its terms are fulfilled. Sign and date the document. Leave a blank line beneath, reserved for the silent co-signature. Now place the paper where your eyes will greet it upon waking. Read it aloud, slowly, breathing life into each syllable. As you pronounce the outcome, feel the sensation of ownership ripple outward from the center of your chest. Linger until the feeling grows dense, as though you could lift it with your hands. In that instant, a subtle click sounds in the unseen office downstairs. Repeat the ritual before sleep, imprinting the agreement upon a mind about to dream 8 hours without worldly distraction. While you slumber, mental clerks review the file, cross-reference past records, and begin dispatching messages to intuition, imagination, and environment, alerting them to their new assignment. Yet many a contract stalls because the applicant neglects to perform the first small clause. Resolve that tomorrow you will act in unmistakable alignment with the document. Telephone a prospect, enroll in the night course, cancel a time-sapping habit. However minor, the deed must send a clear telegram down the neural wires. Commence operations. The master is in earnest. The subconscious, observing congruence between speech and motion, inks its elegant flourish on the blank line you left. Your charter becomes enforceable and power gathers around it the way iron filings rush toward a magnet. Do not look for fireworks when the signature is affixed. The registrar works by stealth. Within days, you will notice an article that answers a technical question, an acquaintance who knows precisely the investor you require, and an idea that solves the dilemma that had blocked your blueprint for months. Each arrival is stamped with an invisible postmark, filed and executed by order of the subconscious mind. Guard the contract as sacred, for natural forces will test its lamination. A late bill, a mocking relative, a market dip, each dares you to doubt the seal. When such trials appear, lay a palm upon the page and reaffirm, aloud, your mutual pledge. Trials are court clerks, checking that both parties remain in accord. Show them the ink is still fresh. They will bow and withdraw. One caution more. As you near fulfillment, resist the subtle sabotage of self-diminishment. Some, standing at the threshold of long-imagined success, flinch and self-invalidate. Do I truly deserve this? Remember, the registrar stamped the deed precisely because you offered fair consideration in effort and service. Accept delivery with gratitude, not apology. Possession taken humbly, yet firmly validates every principle we have studied and prepares the mind for larger trusts ahead. And now, with contract signed and countersigned, you stride into the marketplace no longer as a mendicant hopeful, but as the legal owner of a future awaiting physical occupation. Others will sense something unspoken in your bearing. They may call it confidence, magnetism, or a lucky aura. Smile and let them guess, for the instrument that bestows it is locked within your breast, inked in your own hand, witnessed by infinite intelligence, and filed in the only courthouse that can never burn down. Step forward. The deed is yours. Build upon it a mansion of deeds, a treasury of service, a legacy that will inspire heirs and strangers yet unborn. And should they inquire how you wrought such prosperity from the same raw world that often scorns ambitious dreams, tell them only this: I wrote my desire, and my subconscious signed the bottom line. Epilogue, reauthoring your story. The clock has completed its circuit, and together we have marched from the first faint tremor of desire to the quiet chime of the sixth sense. Yet a book, like a map, is useless unless the traveler steps beyond the page. So let us stand here at the threshold and draft the living charter by which you will turn principle into bloodstream and resolve into daily bread. Begin each dawn before the world's clamor barges in. Sit upright, spine unbowed, and read aloud the definite chief aim you have etched upon paper. Let the words strike the air like a blacksmith's hammer, ringing conviction through the chambers of your being. Close your eyes and behold the scene already fulfilled. Taste the victory, feel its texture against your palms, hear the chorus of gratitude from those your success will aid. These sensations are not fantasies. They are blueprints delivered to the subconscious, and every cell in your body is the laborer sworn to raise the structure. Rise then into action. Attend to the single task you have scheduled, the one most directly aligned with your aim. Complete it while the furnace of purpose still glows from your morning ritual. Do not permit trivial errands to dilute the heat. One decisive deed accomplished at sunrise outweighs a dozen scattered gestures performed in drowsy twilight. Midday, cool counsel with your mastermind. 10 minutes of focused exchange can supply a revelation worth 10 hours of solitary toil. Share progress, accept criticism unflinchingly, and depart with a fresh assignment pressed into your hand like marching orders. When adversity intrudes, as surely it will, pause only long enough to inquire, what treasure do you cloak? Then plunge your pick into the rocky surface, confident that resistance marks the richest seam. Record each apparent setback in a small notebook kept for no other purpose, and beside the entry, leave blank space. In time, you will return to fill that space with the benefit of adversity concealed, and the pages will stand as illuminated proof that Providence never reneges on its hidden promises. Evening arrives, the world grows hushed. Sit once more with your ledger of the mind. Recount the day's victories, however modest, and kindle gratitude until it glows like embers ready for tomorrow's breath. Speak your chief aim again, this time not as a command, but as a benediction, and invite infinite intelligence to shape your sleeping hours into a workshop of solutions. Lay your head upon the pillow convinced, utterly, that unseen hands labor while you dream. Should doubt creep back, and it will, sly as fog, meet it with the sentinel of repetition. Affirm, 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 until faith stands at attention and the intruder retreats. If fatigue saps persistence, recall every hero we have studied, each of whom trod farther, soared deeper, dared longer than comfort counselled. They are silent partners at your elbow. Borrow their stamina until your own is replenished. Day layered upon day, this regimen will weave a new mental fabric, resilient enough to resist any fray of circumstance. Weeks will pass. You will look up and scarcely recognize the landscape. Opportunities unknown to your former self will crowd the horizon, and people will call you fortunate. Smile, for you will know the truth. Fortune is simply the visible signature on a contract first written in the privacy of thought and ratified by unrelenting practice. Now close this volume with gratitude, not farewell, and take possession of the pen that has always lain in your grasp. The next chapter of your life awaits its author. Write it boldly, line by line, until the world reads your finished script and, marveling, names you one of those rare souls who proved that failure indeed begins, and therefore can be forever banished within the mind.